There are so many ridiculous stories in the news just recently that I don't even know where to start. In fact, I wasn't even going to do a video today, but now I've even shaved for the occasion. So it is Saturday. Happy Saturday. But where do we start? Well, a university's been fined almost £600,000 for essentially failing to uphold freedom of speech. We have Shabana Mahmood and Keir Starmer somewhat being embarrassed by the Sentencing Council because they've come back and said, no, we're going to continue with our guidelines regardless of what you think. And people are obviously now saying, well, who's in charge, the government or the Sentencing Council? More thoughts on that in a minute. And you might remember Tahir Ali, who made an appearance on my show here when he was talking about blasphemy laws, i.e. we don't have blasphemy laws, but what he was asking for, or rather demanding, would have led to blasphemy laws. And you can see that a lot of people had a lot to say about that. It had almost 500,000 views and over 10,000 comments. So speaking of which, if you do like my what has been sort of self-described and quoted in the Times just recently as a brutally honest alternative to the mainstream media, please do subscribe to the channel. I'll keep you informed. This, as a brief reminder, was Tahir
adopted a resolution condemning the desecration of religious texts, including the Quran, despite opposition from the previous government. Acts of such mindless desecration only serve to fuel division.
Just pausing there. Acts of such mindless... And I had quite a deep dive into and broke down that little speech of his there. So I'll link this below. Go and check it out. But why is he back in the news now? Well, at a time, as described by James McMurdoch, when Labour's pursuing net zero, the OBR has halved the growth forecast. There's obvious concerns about mass migration. There's challenges of integration on top of all Britain's concerns. Many people are struggling for money. Jobs are being cut. And people are genuinely very seriously worried about how they're going to fund everything. And we have councils effectively going bankrupt across the country. I say effectively because they can't technically go bankrupt, but they can enter a stage where they are effectively bankrupt. So while all of that is going on, we have Tahir Ali making another demand here. He says, this week I attended a press conference ordained by Mohammed Yassin MP, where 20 cross-party British parliamentarians requested an international airport. And so let me just pause to explain why this is, because I will bring his letter on screen in just a moment. But you may have heard of the term diaspora. That is people that are dispersed from their homeland to go and live somewhere else. So if you have a community of Chinese people within Birmingham, say the Chinese quarter of Birmingham or London or wherever, people that live there that have moved from another place, obviously from China, Southeast Asia or Japan or wherever, we call that a diaspora. People have moved from one place to another. So he has concerns that significant numbers of his constituents regarding journey times when they go back to visit their home country and so on are having long haul flights and then long journeys between the airports and where they need to go thereafter. As quoted in his letter, he says, often taking excess of 3 hours of driving following a long-haul flight. These journeys are genuine inhibitors to travel, and we are hearing, he says, increasing demands for an international airport. But the international airport that he's asking for is not another international airport in Birmingham or anywhere in the UK. He's asking for an international airport in Mirpur in Pakistan. Now, I have no problem in principle with the UK funding an airport in Pakistan if, let's say, the UK was absolutely thriving, growth was through the roof, there was abundance of money and wealth, there were no struggles at all, no pensioners were freezing, school children were taken care of, and private schools were properly funded, the state schools were properly funded, all of our industries were booming and thriving, and nobody was struggling, and councils were not going back. You get the picture. If all of that was absolutely fine, then in principle, I have no problem with funding airports and all sorts of things all over the place, because I agree with the reasoning. There's perfect logic and sound reasoning that we have a diaspora of Kashmiri residents in the UK, and it is unfortunate that when they travel back to homelands that they have to travel and so on. Now, lots of people that travel have to undertake lots of driving or further travel thereafter to get to their final destination, and all of this is unfortunate. And so There's genuine reasoning within the letter, to be absolutely fair about it. There is genuine logic and reasoning here. But for me, as someone whose hometown is indeed Birmingham, and with Tahir Ali being the Labour MP for Birmingham, Hall Green and Moseley, I think I have a bit of a view here to say that I think we should sort out Birmingham first, because I think Birmingham has enough problems to be tackled, and the UK as a whole has enough problems to be tackled and solved before we start building international airports elsewhere. Let me know in the comments if you agree with me. This is not intended in any way to upset anybody, of course. It is not intended in any way to make people fight against each other. This is a perfectly sensible, logical, reasonable conversation about where our funds should be spent and what are the most pressing needs. And in my view, personally, the most pressing need is not an international airport in another country. But nonetheless, his letter says the undersigned, and he's not the only one, there's a list of MPs here: Debbie Abrahams, Zabir Ahmed, Tahir Ali himself, Rosina Alin Khan, etc., etc. Lots of MPs have signed this letter. And they say that they write to draw attention to a very important matter for the Kashmiri diaspora in the UK. As I've mentioned, successive prime ministers of Pakistan have committed to develop welfare projects, including an international airport in Mirpur, in Azad, Jammu and Kashmir, etc., which remain unrealised. We, the undersigned, are grateful for the political, diplomatic and moral support given to the Kashmiris, including a number of successful development and welfare-oriented initiatives, etc. Again, no problem with these in principle if we are sort of taking care of ourselves and if the UK is on its feet properly rather than on its knees. He goes on, these have undoubtedly had a significant positive impact on the region, the lives of the people, etc. However, our concern is the long-standing promise of an international airport in Mirpur has yet to be met. The nearest airport is miles away. Kashmiri diaspora spend hours driving. Delivering a new international airport will unlock greater potential, economic growth, etc., etc. Robert Jenrick wades in with a scathing attack. You're an MP for Birmingham, he says, not Mirpur. The streets of your city are literally piled high in rubbish thanks to your Labour Council. Focus on the UK. And I couldn't share that sentiment more. As I said, I have no problem in principle in these sort of things, assisting other countries, if the UK is flush with cash, bustling, thriving, growing, and then we can do a lot of great things for other countries. But if you take a look at these photographs here, this is what certain parts of Birmingham look like. These photographs here show exactly what's going on in Birmingham right now. And as I said, someone who grew up in Birmingham, this is devastating to see the way that the city has transformed over the years. And now, I mean, I recognize these areas. Now it's just a dump. It is literally a rubbish dump with rats, etc. running around. So the focus is just wrong. It's all over the place and it's out of order. Moving on, you can let me know what you think about that in the comments. University of Sussex has been fined, let me make sure that you can actually see that. University of Sussex has been fined £585,000 by the regulator, the education regulator, the Office for Students, for failing to uphold freedom of speech. Now, this is something that I've said again and again and again for months, if not probably a couple of years now. This is a problem. And it's not just its universities, the NHS, certainly for Scotland, and I think bits around the UK as well, trusts around the UK. They are having a problem with what they are allowing people to say or not allowing people to say with regard to gender identity and all of these kind of things. Now, again, I stress, nothing that of what I say is intended to upset anybody. But the Office for Students here conducted an investigation which started with Professor Stock, I've mentioned before, who left the university in 2021 after being accused of transphobia for the views on gender issues. The OFS said that the university's policy statement on trans and non-binary equality. Now, a bit of a side point on the non-binary point here. A lot of people have asked about the legal status of non-binary. There is no technical legal status of non-binary. The Supreme Court decided via passports and said there is no third option. You are male or female. Now, albeit that can change with a gender recognition certificate under the Gender Recognition Act, etc. And we're still awaiting the Supreme Court judgment in For Women Scotland, hopefully clarifying that having a GRC or with or without a GRC doesn't attract the same legal protection as a woman, because otherwise that obliterates protection for women, in my view, in certain respects. But we digress. So there's no third option for binary, but the policy statement on trans and non-binary equality, including a requirement to positively, now emphasize this, it included a requirement, and this is something even my regulator's been looking at just recently, having a requirement to positively represent trans people, or to positively encourage trans people or anyone with gender identity issues. Now, among many others, I have an issue with that as well, because as barristers, we represent clients regardless of our views. If someone's accused of a heinous crime and you don't agree with the crime, it doesn't matter. You represent them to the best of your ability. If there's any shred of a defense there, or even a pure denial, you see, we have two broad defenses in law. One is not strictly a legal defense, it's just your defense. One defense is a denial, which usually leads to misidentification or a misunderstanding, or you didn't intend something, whatever. So it's a straight denial. You deny that you did something deliberately or maliciously or whatever. So there's a straight denial. Another defense is if you have a defense. So the typical would be self-defense. If someone's attacked you, you've attacked them. Self-defense. We represent someone, whatever their defense is, whatever they've done, regardless of what we think and believe. It doesn't matter. It is not our job to believe the client. It's not our job to agree with them or any of the philosophies, etc. But if the regulator were to, because this has been bounced around a lot, if the regulator were to impose that we must positively encourage certain things, that I think affects our independence. And that is, ironically, one of our core duties, to remain independent. I've had complaints against me just recently, in fact, for things that I've said on these issues. Even when I mention these issues and I give a view, whether that's a legal view, not legal advice, but legal view, or just a personal view, people have complained about those. They've been dismissed, thankfully, because it's free speech. It's Article 10 free speech. And in fact, we have a bit of a champion for free speech in our profession at the moment, and that is Dr. Charlotte Proudman. I have huge respect for her following this case through, having been prosecuted by our regulator, and the case was dismissed on the basis that it's free speech. So I'll link her below. Go follow. She's got a fantastic book out, He Said, She Said, which goes into great detail. I know I digress, but she goes into great detail about the family courts and what really goes on there. So check that out as well. So back to Sussex University. The OFS said that the university's policy could lead to staff and students preventing themselves from voicing opposing views. Now, for a university, that's ridiculous, because for a university, it's supposed to be about opposing views. Just like barristers are all about opposing views. Someone said, you can't always be right. Well, no, of course not. If you go to court, one side wins and the other side loses, although actually most of the time, both sides might feel like they've lost. So, for example, even when someone's prosecuted for a crime and they are found not guilty, they still feel like they've lost because they've been dragged through and they've lost years of their life. And that is the typical way people feel about these things. So another snippet of news, which I think is utterly preposterous, that had to make news in the first place. And in the same vein, I was alerted to this bit of update for NHS Scotland, so I did dig out the actual document that they're talking about. This is, again, supporting transgender and non-binary staff in the workplace. And in my view, for what it's worth, gets the law fundamentally wrong, because as a starting point, in the workplace, there must be separate provisions for men and women. And so to some extent, in my view, they get the law fundamentally wrong here. What they've said here is as follows. They say transitioning is a personal and individual choice. A transgender person does not have to be under medical supervision or have a gender recognition certificate to have protected characteristic of gender reassignment. Strictly true, but that doesn't follow that they absolutely protected regardless of any other consideration, which is sort of what this goes on to suggest. For example, a transgender person who simply changes their name is protected under the Equality Act, regardless of whether or not they wish to take hormones or have any surgeries. They must be treated in accordance with their gender identity. So what they're saying here is someone changes their name. So Steve changes his name to Lucy. They say they must be treated in accordance with their gender identity. So they must accept Steve as Lucy, as a woman now. And then in the big bold letters here, I'll zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. Too much, still too much. There we go, we got there in the end. The fundamental directive of this protocol it emphasizes, it's not my emphasis, apart from the highlighting. The fundamental directive of this protocol is that all transgender and non-binary people, which, remember the caveat, non-binary is not a third legal recognized status, will be respected as their chosen gender at all times. Discrimination should be challenged, whether the discrimination is direct or indirect, stems from fellow staff members, people who use the services, or a member of the public. So across the board, if Steve says his name is Lucy, and I mean this with the greatest respect, but this is as blunt as it can possibly be, if a Steve walks in one day and says, I've changed my name to Lucy, and now I'm going into the female changing rooms and bathrooms, Steve, or rather Lucy, now is to be respected as a woman at all times by everybody, by people who use the service, members of the public. Now, this cannot possibly impose this upon members of the public, but they say it should be challenged. So they are saying staff should now challenge members of the public if members of the public don't agree that Steve, now Lucy, is in the women's toilets. You see where this is going, and I think that they've fundamentally misunderstood the law. They've certainly misapplied the law, in my personal view, I have to say, for legal reasons. Based on what I read, based on the explanations, I'll link some other videos below so you can get a fuller picture, but also do your own research and look up the law and seek for more legal advice if you're not sure. But in my view, they've fundamentally misapplied the law here. So we are in quite a strange place at the moment. We have universities being fined over £500,000 for squashing free speech. A university squashing free speech, whereas it used to be, at least years ago, always used to be the place of ideas, discussing ideas, challenging ideas. They used to say you go to school to learn something to remember. You go to your A-levels to apply what you remember. Then you go to for your degree to challenge what you remember. And then for PhDs, etc., you research more. And so this is squashing education. It's not just free speech anymore. By squashing free speech at universities, they are, by and large, squashing education at the same time, in my view. And so we have universities being fined huge sums of money for squashing free speech. We have official bodies, public bodies, NHS Scotland, saying you must, even members of the public, you must abide by these rules and this will be challenged. Absolute madness. And then we have Tahir Ali, whose city, my home city, is falling apart and is covered in rubbish, literally with rats running around, is seemingly more interested in building an airport in another country. I'm lost for words sometimes, although I've now been recording for about 20 minutes, so I'll try and chop it down in the edit. But do subscribe here if you like me to keep you up to date with these brutally honest alternatives to the mainstream media. I might make that a tagline. Thank you for watching. Happy Saturday, and I'll see you next time.